My older sister Pam has been a constant presence in my life, but for all the wrong reasons. 3 years ago, when I got married, Pam went out of her way to ruin my big day. She was in the middle of her own divorce and convinced our family not to attend, saying that it would be insensitive for them to celebrate my wedding while she was going through such a hard time. My parents, easily swayed by her drama, sided with her. So, instead of a joyful celebration, I was left with empty seats and unanswered RSVPs. Pam had convinced everyone that my wedding was somehow a betrayal of her, and they believed her. Now, after years of estrangement, I'm pregnant, and the same family that abandoned me on my wedding day suddenly wants to reconnect. It started when I shared the pregnancy announcement on social media. Moments later, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from my mom, followed by one from my dad. It was like they had been waiting for an excuse to reach out. At first, I ignored them, not wanting to fall back into old patterns, but they persisted, leaving voicemails about how they were so happy for me and so excited to be grandparents. My mom's voice sounded falsely cheerful, like she was trying too hard to gloss over our complicated history. Finally, I answered, bracing myself for what I knew would be a messy conversation. As soon as I picked up, Mom's voice spilled over with excitement, as if nothing had ever gone wrong between us. "Sweetheart, we saw your announcement. We're thrilled for you." And Pam, well, she thinks it's a beautiful chance for the family to come together again. I was floored. For years, they had hardly spoken to me. And now, out of nowhere, Pam was in the background orchestrating another family reunion, this time around my unborn child. The irony wasn't lost on me. I knew Pam's interest was less about me or the baby and more about her own struggles. She had recently gone through another unsuccessful round of IVF, and I could tell that, in her mind, my pregnancy was an opportunity for her to finally share in motherhood. As if reading my thoughts, my dad chimed in, trying to smooth things over. "Pam has had a rough time, and we think being close to your baby might help her. This is a healing moment for everyone, honey." The words were like a slap in the face. They didn't want to mend things with me. They just wanted to give Pam a surrogate experience of motherhood through my child. I tried to keep my voice steady as I replied, "Mom, Dad, this is my baby. Pam doesn't need to be a part of it. She didn't care about my wedding or my life for the last 3 years. And now she thinks she can just insert herself?" Mom sounded hurt, which almost made me laugh. "Don't be cruel. Pam loves you. She's offering to help because she cares. And family support is important, especially now that you're having a baby." I took a deep breath, remembering the pain of my wedding day. I appreciate the sudden interest, but where was this support when I needed it 3 years ago? Pam made sure I was alone. She convinced everyone I was the villain in her story, and no one questioned it. The silence on the line was heavy. Then Dad, in a more frustrated tone, said, "Why do you keep bringing up the past? We're offering an olive branch here. Pam wants to move forward. Pam wants to move forward because she's miserable, and you two just want to feel better about abandoning me." I shot back, "I don't need this olive branch, if it's just another way to put Pam at the center of my life." I hung up, hands shaking, feeling a strange mix of anger and relief. I had stood up for myself finally, but the fallout came quickly. Within hours, my phone was flooded with texts from other family members, many of whom had only heard Pam's version of events. They were angry, accusing me of being selfish and holding grudges. It was exhausting to read, and I realized that nothing I said would ever change their minds. Pam had them convinced that she was the victim, and I was the cold-hearted sister refusing to let her heal. That night, my husband noticed the tension and took my hand. His gentle, understanding gaze reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. "They're only interested now because of the baby, right?" he asked, hitting the nail on the head. "Exactly," I replied, trying to shake off the lingering frustration. "Pam thinks my child will somehow make up for her own loss, and my parents are just going along with it because they feel guilty for what happened at our wedding." He nodded, squeezing my hand. "They're living in Pam's world, not yours. We'll make our own family one that's actually supportive." I smiled, grateful for his unwavering support. But the reality of it all was still hard to digest. Pam had always found ways to insert herself into every part of my life, always making her problems bigger, her pain more deserving of attention. Even at my wedding, she'd made herself the star by playing the tragic, wronged sister. A year after my wedding, I ran into Pam's ex-husband, James, at a mutual friends gathering. He hadn't attended the wedding, and now I knew why. He told me about how Pam had used my wedding as a pawn in her divorce battle, telling him she couldn't move forward with the split because the family was falling apart. She made it sound like I was tearing the family apart by getting married, and he admitted he had believed her at the time. She said she needed family unity to get through her problems, he'd said, shaking his head in disbelief. It wasn't until later that I realized she was just using it as another way to manipulate everyone. Learning the truth from James gave me a strange sense of closure. Pam had twisted everything to make herself look like the victim, even if it meant alienating me. Now, years later, she wanted to play second mother to my child, as if all the pain she caused had never happened. The days that followed were filled with calls and texts from various family members, each one trying to convince me that I was overreacting. Some even hinted that I was depriving Pam of a chance to heal. It was incredible to see the lengths they'd go to for her, as if I hadn't suffered from her actions at all. Then one afternoon, my cousin Katie reached out, asking if we could meet for coffee. Katie had always been one of the more reasonable members of the family, and I was curious to hear her take on everything. When we met, she gave me a sympathetic smile and asked, "Do you regret telling your parents off?" "No," I said, not even needing to think about it. I needed to stand up for myself. If they can't see how Pam's manipulated them, that's their problem. Katie nodded. "Good for you. Honestly, you're not alone in seeing through her. We all saw how she turned your wedding into her own SOB story. I just wish more people would admit it." Her words gave me a sense of validation I hadn't realized I needed. For so long, I'd felt alone in dealing with Pam's toxic behavior. Knowing that someone else saw it too felt like a weight lifted. When I went home that night, I talked to my husband about it all. "I don't think they'll ever stop," I told him. "Pam will always find a way to make herself the center of attention, and our family will always buy into it." He nodded, wrapping his arms around me. "Then we focus on our own life, our own family. Let them do whatever they want." As I felt our baby move, a sense of peace settled over me. I was done letting Pam and my parents dictate my happiness. They had chosen their loyalty, and now I was choosing mine. I didn't need apologies or fake olive branches from people who couldn't see past Pam's manipulation. I had my husband, my real family, and soon, our child. We were moving forward together without them. In the days that followed, I made the decision to cut off contact with my parents. They'd made their choice, and I was done being an afterthought to Pam's endless need for attention. It wasn't easy. Letting go of the hope that my family would one day support me unconditionally was painful. But in doing so, I felt a freedom I hadn't known before. For the first time, I could focus on building a life centered around people who truly cared about me, instead of fighting to prove my worth to those who never really would. Pam may have had my family's support, but she couldn't control my happiness anymore. And as I looked toward the future with my husband and our baby, I realized I didn't need their approval. I had everything I needed right here, and that was more than enough. My older sister Pam ruined my wedding day. She was in the middle of a messy divorce and somehow convinced our parents and most of our family members not to attend, claiming it was insensitive of me to get married while she was struggling. I had been planning the wedding for a year, thinking it would be the happiest day of my life, but instead, it was an empty celebration. My parents didn't even call to explain why they weren't coming. They simply sent a last-minute text saying, "We won't be able to make it." I stood at the altar that day, feeling abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. My husband and his family tried to cheer me up, but nothing could take away the sting of seeing all those empty seats. It was supposed to be a day filled with joy and love, yet it became a reminder of how easily Pam could manipulate our family. She had always been the favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong in their eyes. 3 years went by, and during that time, I barely spoke to my parents. They didn't reach out, and I didn't feel any urge to contact them either. The pain of that day was still fresh, and I didn't see a reason to let them back into my life. I moved on, built my own little family with my husband, and was finally at peace until last month, when I announced my pregnancy. The moment my pregnancy announcement went live on social media, my phone buzzed. It was a call from my mom and dad, and for the first time in years, they sounded excited. They acted as though nothing had happened, as if we'd been close all along. "Honey, we saw your announcement. We're so thrilled for you," Mom said, her voice dripping with warmth. "Pam's here with us, and we all think it's time to rebuild the family." I was speechless. For 3 years, they hadn't cared to check in on me. Now, all of a sudden, my pregnancy was an opportunity for them to mend things? It felt surreal. They went on to explain how Pam was struggling emotionally, as her recent IVF attempt had failed, and they thought my pregnancy might be a healing experience for her. Dad even suggested Pam could be like a second mother to my child. It was as if they had forgotten the pain Pam had caused or just didn't care. "Mom, Dad, this is my child," I said, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "I don't need Pam's help or her involvement. She made my wedding day about herself, and I'm not about to let her do that with my pregnancy too." There was a pause before Dad spoke, his tone turning stern. "You're being selfish. Pam's only offering out of love. You need support, and we're family." "Family?" I almost laughed. I reminded them of how Pam had actively gone out of her way to alienate me at my own wedding. She had spread lies, twisting every little thing until our relatives believed I was somehow the cause of her marriage problems. And now, they expected me to let her act like a mother to my child? Pam made the choice to keep people away with her lies. Now, you think I should just forgive her and pretend it never happened? I replied, unable to hide the anger in my voice. Mom chimed in, her tone soft but insistent. "Honey, you're holding on to a grudge. Pam's trying to move on, and this baby could help her do that. Think of it, a child can bring a family closer." "Oh, so this isn't really about me or the baby," I shot back. "It's about Pam needing a distraction and you needing an excuse to play. Happy family. You don't care about mending things with me, you only care because Pam's struggling." Dad didn't take well to that. "That's uncalled for," he snapped, his voice laced with frustration. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I realized then how pointless it was to argue with them. "I don't need your support," I said firmly. "I have my husband and his family. You left me once, you can keep doing it." With that, I hung up the phone. As I set it down, I felt a strange sense of relief. For once, I had stood up for myself. I wasn't letting them guilt me into opening my life back up to the same people who had hurt me so deeply. But the backlash came quickly. Within hours, my phone was buzzing with messages from extended family members, many of them angry, accusing me of being selfish and cold-hearted. They'd clearly heard only one side of the story, my parents' version. The texts accused me of holding grudges, of being unwilling to let the past go. It was exhausting to read, but I knew they only cared now because Pam was in pain, not because they truly cared about reconnecting with me. That night, as I sat with my husband, he noticed my tension. He took my hand gently, his eyes filled with understanding. "You know this isn't your fault," he said quietly. "Pam made her choices, and your parents enabled her. They want to sweep everything under the rug because they're uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean you have to do the same." I nodded, grateful for his unwavering support. "It's just hard," I admitted. "They've always favored Pam, and now they're trying to use my pregnancy to keep catering to her. It's like they don't even see me." He wrapped his arms around me, reassuring me with his presence. "You don't owe them anything. Pam chose to act the way she did, and they chose to support her. Focus on us, on our family." I thought back to a conversation I'd had a year after our wedding. I had run into Pam's ex-husband by chance, and he had apologized for not attending the wedding, explaining that Pam had used the event to delay their divorce. She had manipulated him, insisting that he should wait until her family issues were resolved. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "She made it sound like you were tearing the family apart," he'd told me. But in reality, she was just stalling. She had stopped using birth control without telling me, hoping I'd eventually agree to have kids with her. She lied to me, to everyone. He looked weary, a man who had finally freed himself from years of manipulation. I wish I'd seen through her sooner. That conversation gave me a sense of closure. Pam hadn't just hurt me, she had deceived everyone around her, including the man she'd married. And yet, my parents still defended her. It was like they were blind to her manipulations, or just didn't want to see them. As my husband held me that night, I realized how freeing it was to know the truth. Pam could keep spinning her web of lies, but I wasn't caught in it anymore. I had my own family now, people who truly cared about me. In the days that followed, my parents continued trying to contact me, even resorting to vague social media posts about forgiveness and family unity. Watching them portray themselves as victims hurt deeply. They ignored the pain they'd inflicted on me, caring more about preserving their image than actually mending our relationship. Eventually, some cousins reached out, family members who'd always been kind but didn't know the whole story. They wanted to meet up and hear my side, and I agreed, hoping someone in the family would finally understand. Sitting together, I opened up about everything, from my wedding day to the recent attempts to involve my sister Pam in my child's life. My cousin Katie listened quietly, and when I was done, she said, "I'm so sorry you went through this. They made you feel like an outsider in your own family." Relief washed over me. For the first time, someone understood. "They're only reaching out because Pam wants a baby and can't have one," I explained. "They're not here for me, they're here to make her feel better." Katie took my hand, a sympathetic look in her eyes. "You don't owe them anything," she said firmly. "You deserve better." As I looked around the table at my cousins, I realized I wasn't alone. I didn't need my parents' approval or Pam's half-hearted attempts at reconciliation. I had people in my life who truly cared. That day, I made a decision. I would prioritize those who genuinely valued me. I didn't need apologies from people who only wanted to fix things for their own benefit. I was ready to embrace the future with those who truly loved me, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Then, my ex-husband reached out. 6 years had passed since he cheated on me with my sister, but seeing his name in my inbox brought back memories I'd tried to bury. This man had shattered me, and my sister's betrayal cut even deeper. But I had rebuilt my life and found peace. I never expected him to come crawling back, not after all this time. Back then, I thought I had everything. We were high school sweethearts, and I believed he was my forever. We talked about starting a family and shared dreams for our future. But over time, his behavior shifted, working late, claiming to be with friends. I trusted him implicitly, never questioning his absences. My sister and I had always had a complicated relationship. She was used to getting her way, often manipulating people around her. Despite our differences, I never thought she'd go so far as to ruin my marriage. Then, one evening, I decided to surprise my husband at work, only to find out he wasn't there. Suspicion gnawed at me, and over the next few days, I noticed patterns I had ignored. Eventually, I found the truth. While he was supposedly out of town for business, I tried calling my sister, only for it to go to voicemail. Her social media had gone quiet, which was unusual for someone who loved attention. So, I checked her posts through a friend's account, and there it was. She was on vacation in the same city where my husband was on his business trip. My heart shattered as I pieced everything together. When he returned, I confronted him, and he confessed everything. For nearly a year, he'd been cheating on me with my sister. My world crumbled. I cut them both out of my life and started over, determined to heal. Over time, I rebuilt myself, found love again, and moved forward. But now, 6 years later, he was reaching out. His message was simple, a regret-filled apology and a request to see me one last time. Part of me wanted to delete the email, to pretend he didn't exist. But another part of me, the one that had been broken, wanted him to see how well I was doing without him. So I agreed to meet. When we met, he was a shadow of the man I once knew, filled with regret and shame. He poured out his story, admitting how much he had lost since our divorce. When he was done, I told him I had forgiven him, not for his sake, but for mine. I let go of the anger long ago because it would have destroyed me. I told him I was happy, that I had moved on. The disbelief on his face was almost satisfying. He hadn't expected me to be content, hadn't thought I'd find happiness after his betrayal. I thanked him for the lessons he unknowingly taught me, then walked away, feeling lighter. I no longer needed his validation or an apology. I had built a beautiful life without him, and that was the closure I needed. As I walked away, I felt a profound sense of peace. Life had taught me that people who betray us don't deserve space in our hearts or minds. Sometimes, the best revenge is to live well and be genuinely happy. Knowing he lost someone who truly loved him because of his selfishness, that's a reality he'll live with forever. And me? I've never looked back. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support helps the channel grow and reach more people. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more amazing stories just like this one. Thanks for being part of the journey.